The Billiard Room with One Door, a Sherlock Holmes full mystery. Chapter 1. The Scream Behind the Green Baize. The scream came at 11 minutes past 9, and it was Griggs the steward who made it, though he would later insist to 3 different policemen that a man of his position did not scream, he merely called out. He had been standing outside the billiard room door the whole evening, as he stood every Tuesday when Sir Aubrey Fenwick Hale played his match. It was his habit to knock at the quarter hour with fresh soda water. That night he knocked, received no answer, knocked again, and when the silence held past all reasonable patience, he tried the handle. The door was locked, not merely closed, locked from within, as every member of the Coriolanus Club well knew it could be, for Sir Aubrey disliked being disturbed at play and had long ago fitted a bolt to the inside. Griggs put his eye to the keyhole and saw, by the low gaslight, a shape on the Turkish carpet that no living man arranged himself into by choice. Within 4 minutes the door had been forced by 2 footmen and the club's president, Mr. Bartholomew Rees, and within 4 minutes after that, the whole of the Coriolanus Club, some 19 gentlemen who had been idling over sherry and the evening papers, knew that Sir Aubrey Fenwick Hale, magistrate of 30 years Indian service, lay dead upon his own billiard-room floor, with a thin blade wound beneath the 5th rib, and that the only door to that room had been locked, bolted, and watched without a break by a steward who had not moved from his post. The windows, it was quickly established, were barred with iron on the outside, an old precaution from the house's days as a private residence, when its owner had feared burglars more than billiards. No chimney served the room, no trap on the floor, one door, one witness, and a dead man who could not by any account offered that night have been killed by anyone but himself. Nobody believed for a moment that he had. I set this down not because I witnessed the scene myself, I did not and would not until the following morning, but because Sherlock Holmes later reconstructed it for me with such exactness, drawn from a dozen separate interviews, that I have come to think of it as something I saw with my own eyes. That is, I have found the particular gift of my friend. He does not merely solve a crime, he hands you back the hour of its committing, whole and breathing, as though you had stood in the doorway yourself. I had no notion, dressing for breakfast the next morning in our rooms at Baker Street, that I would spend that hour there before the week was out. Chapter 2. A caller before the marmalade. Holmes was already at the table when I came down, though he was not eating. He sat with his dressing gown drawn tight, turning a small object over and over between his fingers, a fragment of amber-coloured billiard chalk I saw when he set it down, no bigger than a shirt button. "You have had a caller," I said, nodding at a card upon the cloth. "I have had a caller," he agreed, "and I shall have him again directly, for he left in some agitation before I could finish my questions, and he will be back before the coffee is cold. Sit, Watson. You will want to hear this twice, once from me and once from him, and the 2 accounts will not entirely agree, which is itself instructive." He passed me the card. Mr. J. Pemberton, Secretary, the Coriolanus Club. "A dead magistrate," Holmes said, "in a locked room, in a club so respectable that its members have not had a scandal worth the name since the Reform Bill. Mr. Pemberton arrived at 7:30, Watson, before I had so much as shaved, babbling of bolts and barred windows, and a steward who swears on his mother's grave he never left the passage. You know all this already. I know what he told me, which is not the same thing as knowing what happened. There is a distinction there worth keeping in your notebook." He tossed me the morning paper, folded to a paragraph headed, "Tragic Death of Distinguished Magistrate. The Yard has been called. Lestrade, I should think, given the hour and the address. St. James's summons get the better inspectors." I read the notice while Holmes resumed his study of the chalk fragment, holding it to the window light with the peculiar stillness he reserved for objects that had told him something and not yet finished telling. "You found that in his pocket?" "In Pemberton's coat, where it had no earthly business being. Since Pemberton, I am reliably informed by the calluses of his right hand and the ink stain on his left cuff, has not held a billiard cue in a decade. He picked it up somewhere last night without noticing. Men do that when they are frightened. Their hands gather things their minds are too occupied to register. He set the chalk down at last. It tells me only that he was in that room, or very near it, after the body was found, which he has already admitted freely. A small deduction, offered for practice, not for pride. The bell rang below before I could answer. Holmes smiled, not warmly, but with the particular satisfaction of a man whose clock has kept good time. "There," he said. "The coffee, you will note, is still quite hot." Chapter 3. What Mr. Pemberton knew, and feared to say Josiah Pemberton, was a narrow, precise man of perhaps 50, the sort whose whole career had been spent making certain that nothing untoward ever happened under his stewardship, and who now found himself confronted with the largest untoward thing of his professional life. He sat on the edge of our basket chair, as though the cushion itself might be evidence of something. "Mr. Holmes, I must beg you to understand the delicacy of the club's position. Sir Aubrey was not merely a member, he was our oldest member, and a magistrate of the first distinction. If word gets about that a man can be murdered within the Coriolanus, with the doors locked and a steward standing not 6 feet away, then other clubs will feel a draught of anxiety, and yours will feel the chill of scandal," Holmes finished. "Yes, I understand the stakes to your subscription list perfectly well. Now tell me what you have not yet told the police, Mr. Pemberton, for I observe you have left something out of your account, and I should rather hear it from you than dig it out myself at some later, more embarrassing hour." Pemberton went the colour of old parchment. There was a letter, found in Sir Aubrey's desk 2 days before his death. I did not read the whole of it. It spoke of old debts, Mr. Holmes, debts of honour from his years in India. It was unsigned. A threat. I took it as one. Sir Aubrey laughed it off in my hearing, called it the whining of some native pensioner with a grievance 30 years stale, but I noticed he locked his desk drawer afterward, which he had never troubled to do before. Holmes leaned forward with the sudden, coiled attention I had come to know well. "You have this letter, burned, I should imagine, or taken. It was not among his papers when the police searched this morning, and who, besides yourself, knew of it?" Pemberton hesitated a fraction too long. "His clerk, Mr. Quill, handles all of Sir Aubrey's correspondence, has done for 4 years now, ever since he came to us with excellent references from a private secretaryship abroad. It is possible Quill saw it before I did. He sorts the Morning Post." Holmes made no visible note of this, though I had learned to distrust his stillness more than his questions. "Tell me about the room itself, the bolt. Who besides Sir Aubrey could reach it?" "No one, once the door was shut. It is a simple sliding bolt, fitted low, operable only from within. And the key to the door itself? There is only one key, Mr. Holmes, and it hangs on Sir Aubrey's own watch chain. It was found this morning still in the lock, on the inside. Who discovered the body first, precisely, once the door gave way?" Griggs looked in through the broken panel, then myself, and directly behind me, Dr. Ashworth, our club physician, a member himself, thank Providence, for he was able to examine Sir Aubrey where he lay before the police disturbed anything. "And his verdict? A single wound, narrow-bladed, struck upward beneath the ribs. Death, Ashworth judged, had occurred perhaps 20 minutes before we broke in, though he was reluctant to commit himself closely on the point." Holmes's eyes had not left Pemberton's face throughout this recitation, and now he asked, almost idly, who played billiards against Sir Aubrey that night. He had no fixed opponent booked. He generally practised alone on Tuesdays before his match proper on Thursdays, though Pemberton paused, and I saw the hesitation was genuine this time, not calculation. Though Colonel Vane was heard in the passage near the billiard room shortly before 9, there had been words between them at dinner. Sir Aubrey held a note of the Colonel's for £1,100, and had that very evening threatened, in front of witnesses, to call it in. Holmes rose so abruptly that Pemberton started. "Watson, fetch your hat. Mr. Pemberton, you will do me the kindness of telegraphing to your steward that we are to be admitted the moment we arrive, and of touching nothing further in that room until I have seen it, whatever Inspector Lestrade may already have disturbed." Chapter 4. The Room That Kept Its Secret. The Coriolanus Club wore its grief with a stiff upper lip and drawn curtains. A constable stood at the street door, and within, the hall smelled of beeswax and, faintly, of the fear that hangs about any house where death has recently walked through in a manner nobody can explain. Lestrade met us at the billiard room threshold, looking harried in the particular way that told me the case had already refused to yield to him. "Mr. Holmes, I'll not pretend I'm sorry to see you, though I don't know what you'll make of it that I haven't. The room's sealed tight as a ship's hold, and the man inside it is as dead as Queen Anne." "Then let us see the ship's hold," said Holmes, and stepped past him. The billiard room was long and handsome, panelled in dark oak, its single table dominating the centre beneath a hooded gas lamp. The body had been removed, but its outline remained chalked upon the carpet near the table's far end, close by the fireplace. Cold, I noted, and evidently unlit that evening, for the grate held only old ash. Holmes went first to the door, examining the bolt with his lens, then the broken panel where the footman's shoulders had done their work. "The bolt is sound," he murmured. "No scoring, no forcing from without. It was thrown from inside by a hand that meant it stayed there." He crossed to the windows next, 3 tall sashes, each crossed with iron bars set into the stone outside, painted over so many times that no bar had been freshly disturbed in years, as the flaking paint plainly showed. "The chimney," Lestrade offered, somewhat defensively. "We had the sweeps boy up it this morning. Too narrow for a cat, let alone a man." "I did not doubt it," said Holmes, though he examined the hearth regardless, running his fingers along the inner brick with a thoroughness that made even Lestrade fall silent. He paused there longer than I expected, his head tilted, before rising and moving to the great walnut cabinet that held the club's spare cues and score slates. "This room was a private study once, I think, before the house became a club." "So Pemberton tells me," said Lestrade. 40 years back or more. What of it?" "Old houses remember their old shapes longer than their owners do." Holmes rapped, lightly, along the panelling behind the cabinet, 3 sharp knuckle taps, evenly spaced, moving the length of the wall. I watched his face for some change and saw none. Whatever he was listening for, he had not yet found it, or had found it and chosen to say nothing. He turned instead to the body's chalked outline and crouched beside it a long while, examining not the outline itself but the carpet's nap around it, brushing it with 2 fingers against the grain, then with the grain again. "Watson, come and tell me what you make of this." I knelt where he indicated. The carpet, a heavy Turkish weave, showed faint parallel lines near where the head must have lain, not bloodstains but a kind of bruising to the pile, as though something narrow and firm had rested there and been drawn away. A walking stick, perhaps, or the leg of some piece of furniture since moved. "Perhaps," said Holmes, which from him was as good as a denial, delivered gently enough not to wound. He straightened, dusting his knees. "Lestrade, the wound. Ashworth's report puts death at some 20 minutes before the door was forced. Does that satisfy you?" "It satisfies the doctor, which is good enough for me. The man was warm but cooling when they broke in. That's Ashworth's own word for it, and he's attended more corpses than you or I have had hot dinners." "It is precisely the word I wish to hear," said Holmes, and something in his tone made me glance at him sharply, though his face gave nothing else away. "One further question, Lestrade, and then I have disturbed your morning. Who, besides the steward, passed along that corridor between 8 and 9 last evening?" Lestrade consulted his notebook. "Half the club, near enough. It's the passage to the smoking room. Colonel Vane went by twice, by his own account. Once toward the smoking room, once back. The clerk, Quill, came through once with letters for the president. Young Mr. Carraway passed twice as well, saying he was pacing off with a headache, and Dr. Ashworth came through at 8:45 to fetch his bag from the cloakroom, having promised Sir Aubrey a look at a troublesome knee before the week was out. A crowded corridor, said Holmes, for a room that only one man could possibly have entered. He said nothing further of significance until we were back upon the pavement, where he stood a moment, looking up at the club's grey face with an expression I had learned to associate with a fox that has just heard the first faint note of the hounds. Not fear, but a fierce and private pleasure. "Watson," he said, "I believe I know how it was done. I have not the faintest notion yet who did it, and I would ask you not to press me, for a wrong guess spoken aloud has a way of hardening into a belief before the facts have earned it. Come, we shall want Colonel Vane's history before dinner, and I fancy Mycroft's index will save us a week of the Colonial Office's correspondence. Chapter 5. The Obvious Villain. Colonel Rutherford Vane received us in his rooms off Pall Mall with the wary hospitality of a man who has already guessed why he is being visited and has decided that bluster is his best defence. He was a big, weathered man, 60 or thereabouts, with a soldier's stiff bearing gone slightly to seed about the middle, and a temper that showed itself before Holmes had finished his second sentence. "I'll tell you plainly what I told the inspector, sir, and I'll not soften it for you. I hated Aubrey Fenwick Hale, hated him for 20 years, since Lahore, when he sat in judgment over affairs a soldier's court should have settled, and made a public mockery of men who'd bled for the crown. I owed him money, yes, £1,100, and he meant to have it or my ruin, and he said as much before half the club at dinner, the old devil, smiling while he said it. If you've come to hear me deny wanting him dead, you've wasted a cab fare. I have come," said Holmes mildly, "to hear you account for the 20 minutes before the door was broken. I was in the smoking room the whole while, with Carraway and old Trentham and 2 others, cursing Fenwick Hale over a whisky and soda, which is a poor sort of alibi to offer a court, I grant you, since it amounts to nothing but my own black temper witnessed by 4 other gentlemen. You did not enter the billiard room at any point that evening. I passed its door twice, as I've told the police twice already, once going to the smoking room near 8:30, once coming back near 9:15. I did not go in, I had no key, and no bolt to throw even though I wished for it, since the wretched thing locks from the inside only." Holmes regarded him for a long moment with that curious, unhurried patience that unsettled guilty and innocent men in exactly equal measure. "Colonel, when you passed the billiard room door the second time, going toward the smoking room again, or returning from it," Vane frowned, working it out honestly, which told me something in itself. "Returning. I'd left my cigar case in the smoking room and gone back for it. Did you hear anything from within the billiard room as you passed? The click of ivory, a voice, a footstep? Now that you press me on it." Vane's frown deepened. "I believe I heard nothing at all," which struck me as odd even then, for Aubrey generally muttered to himself over his shots, cursing a poor cannon, loud enough to be heard in the street. I recall thinking the old fool had given up early for once. What time was this, as near as you can place it? 20 to 9, or thereabouts. Griggs would have been at his post by then. Holmes rose, and I saw in the set of his shoulders that he had got what he came for, though his face betrayed nothing but polite thanks as he took his leave. It was not until we were in the cab, rattling back toward Baker Street through a thickening fog, that he permitted himself to speak. "Watson," he said, "Colonel Vane is very probably innocent, and Lestrade will very probably arrest him within the week regardless, because he has motive, means of opportunity by proximity, and a temper that photographs badly in a newspaper sketch. That is precisely why I distrust the case against him. You think he's too obviously a villain?" "I think," said Holmes, watching the gaslight swim past the fogged window, "that a man heard silence at 20 minutes to 9, where he expected to hear a magistrate cursing his own poor play, and that no one, not Lestrade, not Ashworth, not even our anxious Mr. Pemberton, has yet asked the one question that silence ought to have raised in every mind that heard of it. Which is," Holmes turned from the window, and in the passing lamplight his eyes had the bright, cold clarity I had learned to watch for above all his other expressions, "whether Sir Aubrey Fenwick Hale was already dead a full 20 minutes before anyone in that club believed him to be alive." Chapter 6. A second silence. The fog had thickened to a proper London particular by the time we reached Baker Street, and Holmes spent the better part of an hour before the fire, with his knees drawn up and his pipe unlit in his hand, which was, in my experience, the surest sign that his mind had gone somewhere I could not follow. "If he was dead by 20 minutes to 9, I said at last, "then Ashworth's estimate of the time of death was wrong by a considerable margin." "Ashworth's estimate was not wrong, Watson. It was correct. and it is precisely because it was correct that it misled everyone who heard it. He knocked out his cold pipe against the grate. A body cools at a rate any doctor can judge within a reasonable window, warm but cooling, Ashworth said, at 9:30 when the door was broken. That is consistent with a death at 9, or at 20 to 9, or very nearly anywhere within that span, provided one thing. What thing? Provided the room in which the body lay was cold enough to hasten it. He looked at me suddenly. You noted the grate yourself this morning. Cold ash, unlit fire, on a chill October evening, in a room a man meant to occupy for the better part of an hour at his solitary practice. Does that strike you as a magistrate's habit, Watson, to sit shivering over his billiards rather than ring for a fire? I confess it had not struck me at all until he said it, and I told him so. No matter, it struck me, which is rather the point of my being here. He rose and crossed to the window, drawing back the curtain to look down into the fog-blurred street, though I do not think he was looking at anything in it. A cold room accelerates cooling, Watson. If Sir Aubrey died nearer to 8:30 than to 9, in a room already growing cold, Ashworth's honest estimate would still read as consistent with a death some 20 minutes before the door was forced. The doctor has not lied to us. He has simply been asked to measure something with an instrument that was never designed for the precision the case demands. Then Vane's alibi becomes rather stronger than the police currently credit it, since a man cannot be blamed for a silence he heard at 20 to 9 if the silence was already 10 minutes old by then. Holmes let the curtain fall, but it raises the far more interesting question, which is who was in that room with Sir Aubrey before 8:30, when by every account the corridor outside was all but empty, and how that person came to leave a locked and bolted door behind them. The chimney, the windows, are exactly as sound as Lestrade found them, and exactly as I found them, and I have no quarrel with either examination. He sat again, steepling his fingers, and for a long moment said nothing further. Then, Watson, I want you to recall for me, as precisely as you are able, the panelling behind the cabinet of cues. You examined it with me. What did you observe? I cast my mind back. Dark oak, matching the rest of the room. I noticed nothing remarkable in it, nor did I, to the eye. But I tapped it, if you recall, the length of the wall, and the sound changed twice. Once behind the cabinet itself, which is unremarkable, since any cabinet set against a wall will alter the note a little by its own bulk, and once again, some 3 feet further along, where no cabinet stood to explain it. He rose again, this restless rising, and sitting the surest outward sign I knew of a mind working at full stretch. That old house, Watson, was a private residence before ever it was a club, and private residences of that vintage, standing as it does not 4 streets from what was once the townhouse of the Earl of Denbigh, were very often built with a service passage behind the principal rooms, for servants to tend fires and remove slops without troubling the gentry with their presence. Such passages do not vanish merely because a house changes hands. They are papered over, panelled over, forgotten by everyone except the house itself. You think there is a passage behind that wall? I think it exceedingly probable, and I think further that a man familiar with the house's original plans, a builder's clerk, an old servant, an architect's apprentice, anyone with access to such records, might know of it where the present members of the Coriolanus Club, who have occupied the house scarcely 15 years, do not. I sat forward. Then the murderer need never have passed Griggs at all. He might have entered by the passage, killed Sir Aubrey, and departed the same way, locking the door from within, before he left merely to complete the illusion. No, wait. If he left by the passage, why bother to bolt the door at all? An excellent objection, and it is the one flaw that has kept me from declaring the matter solved this past hour. Holmes's eyes glittered with something that was not quite satisfactory, closer, I think, to the pleasure a chess player takes in an opponent's genuinely difficult move. Why bolt a door you do not need to unlock again, when a hidden passage would serve your escape far better unremarked? There is only one answer I can construct that satisfies it, Watson, and it is this. The murderer wished the room to be found locked. The locked door is not an accident of the crime. That is the entire point of it. Chapter 7. The Clerk Who Sorted the Post. We returned to the Coriolanus Club the following morning, and it was there, in the dim little office off the main hall where the club's correspondence was managed, that I first properly took the measure of Mr. Theodore Quill. He was a slight man of perhaps 55, though something in his stillness made him seem both younger and older by turns, younger in the smoothness of his face, older in a certain patience about the eyes that I associate more readily with men who have waited a very long time for something. He rose when we entered, precise as a metronome, and offered us chairs with the practised courtesy of a man who has spent a career being unremarkable in rooms full of important people. "Mr. Pemberton said you would wish to speak with me. I am entirely at your service, though I fear I can add little to what the police already have." "You handle Sir Aubrey's correspondence," said Holmes, settling into the offered chair with an air of unhurried interest. "I had done so for some years, I understand." "4 years, Mr. Holmes. Come this Michaelmas. I came to the club with the recommendation of a former employer, a Mr. Calloway, now retired to Sussex. Sir Aubrey found my hand suited to his own correspondence, and I have managed it since. His private letters, his notes for the bench, his club subscriptions. You would then have seen the threatening letter Mr. Pemberton mentions, the one concerning matters from Sir Aubrey's years in India." Something in Quill's stillness deepened, though his voice did not change by a fraction. "I sought the Morning Post, Mr. Holmes, but I do not read what is addressed to Sir Aubrey privately. I saw the envelope only, foreign stamp, Indian, I should think, by the postmark, though I could not swear to the town. Sir Aubrey took it into his own hand, and I thought no more of it." "You did not think it curious, a letter from India arriving for a man who had left that country some 15 years before?" "Sir Aubrey had many old connections there, Mr. Holmes. Correspondents, former colleagues, men he had sat in judgment beside. It did not strike me as remarkable." Holmes let a silence stretch a moment before he spoke again, and I recognized the tactic. He had used it on me often enough in argument, to see what a man would fill an empty space with, given the chance. Quill filled it with nothing at all. He sat, hands folded, and waited, with the patience of a man for whom waiting was itself a kind of skill long practised. "Where were you, Mr. Quill?" Holmes asked at last. "Between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, on the evening Sir Aubrey died." "In this office, Mr. Holmes, finishing the club's accounts for the quarter. I left it only once, a little before 9, to carry the President's correspondence up to his rooms. A walk of perhaps 2 minutes each way, as Mr. Pemberton has doubtless told the police already, since he received the letters himself and can vouch for the hour." "And the remainder of the time?" "Alone, at that desk, with these ledgers which I should be glad to show you, though I doubt they will tell you a great deal beyond my own poor arithmetic." It was, I thought, as clean and complete an account as any I had heard offered in the whole affair, and I confess I saw nothing in it to trouble me. But when we had taken our leave and stood once more upon the pavement, Holmes was silent in a way that told me his mind had caught upon something, though for the length of 2 full streets he would not say what. "You suspect him," I said finally. "I suspect everyone equally, Watson, which is to say I suspect no one at all until the facts compel me. But I will tell you this. Mr. Quill has the stillness of a man who has told a story so many times it no longer costs him anything to tell it, and that is a very particular kind of stillness, Watson, quite unlike the stillness of a man who has simply nothing to hide. I would very much like to know where Mr. Calloway of Sussex found him, and what name he answered before he came to London." Chapter 8. Mycroft's Index. Mycroft Holmes received us in the strangers' room of the Diogenes Club, with the air of a man doing his brother a considerable favour, and wishing it fully understood as such. He was, if anything, stouter than when I had last seen him, and no less formidable for it. A great grey intelligence settled into an armchair like a continent settling into its coastline. "Fenwick Hale," he said, before Holmes had finished explaining our errand. I wondered when someone would come asking after him. A tedious little magistrate with a talent for making enemies efficiently, which is at least a form of talent, I suppose. "What do you want of me, Sherlock? His service record, or something more particular?" "Both, if you have them. And I want to know of a case, some 30 years past, in the Punjab, in which Fenwick Hale sat in judgment and a soldier's court was overruled by his verdict. A case that left, I am told, a considerable and lasting grievance. Mycroft's small eyes, deep set in that heavy face, did not so much as flicker, though I had come to understand that this stillness in Holmes signified not indifference but the opposite, a mind already turning at speed. There were several such cases in Fenwick Hale's career, Sherlock. He made rather a specialty of them, but I think I know the one you mean, if my memory of the old Colonial Office files serves. 1866 or thereabouts. A native clerk, a records keeper attached to the district court, a bright and by all accounts thoroughly honest young man, was accused of falsifying land revenue documents to protect a village from an unjust seizure. The soldier's informal tribunal had been inclined to leniency, considering the circumstances genuinely mitigating. Fenwick Hale overruled them, tried the man himself under the full severity of the code, and had him transported. The young man's father, I believe, died of the shame of it within the year. There was a wife, as I recall, and a young son. What became of them? That, said Mycroft, with the faint, dry satisfaction of a man producing precisely the fact his brother did not yet possess. I cannot tell you from memory, though I can have the file sent round to Baker Street by evening, if it will save you a week's correspondence with the India office. I will say only this, Sherlock. Men who lose their fathers to another man's cold administration of the letter of the law have been known, in my experience of these files, to nurse the grievance rather than dull it. Some of them, indeed, appear to have made rather elaborate arrangements of their lives around the nursing of it. Holmes rose to take his leave, but Mycroft raised one heavy hand. One thing further, since you are here, and I dislike wasted journeys on your part, nearly as much as I dislike making my own. The clerk's name, in the file as I recall it, for these things do stay with me, whatever you may think of my exercise, was Qureshi, Amin Qureshi. It is not, I grant you, a name that would survive an Englishman's tongue undamaged across 30 years and half the width of the world. Men have made stranger transformations of themselves than the shortening of a foreign name into something a London club might swallow without choking. I saw Holmes's hand go still upon the door-handle. Quill, he said softly. Qureshi, Amin, Theodore. I offer no certainty, Sherlock, only an index that happens to contain a name and a grievance in the same decade and the same district as your dead magistrate. What you do with the coincidence is your affair entirely, and I would remind you that I do not leave this club to verify it in person, whatever charm you bring to bear upon the point. Chapter 9. A second body changes everything. We had scarcely returned to Baker Street and taken our first cup of tea when a telegram arrived that altered the shape of the case entirely. Holmes read it once, standing, and then read it again seated, which was, in my experience, his way of absorbing news too large to take in on the first pass. Dr. Ashworth, he said, the club's physician, the very man who examined Sir Aubrey's body and gave us our estimate of the time of death, was found this morning in his consulting rooms in Wimpole Street, dead. A fall, his housekeeper believes, down the stairs to his surgery, his neck broken. Good God! An accident? His housekeeper believes it an accident, and Lestrade, I am given to understand, is presently inclined to agree with her, since there is no mark upon him but the fall itself might easily explain, and no sign of any struggle in the house. Holmes was already reaching for his coat. I do not believe it to be an accident for one moment, Watson, and I will tell you precisely why as we drive, for there is no time to waste sitting here, admiring the shape of my own reasoning. In the cab, rattling toward Wimpole Street through a grey and indifferent morning, Holmes spoke rapidly, ticking points off on his fingers in a manner that told me he had, in fact, been expecting some such development, though its precise form had caught even him by surprise. Ashworth gave us the estimate of death that placed the killing nearer to 9 than to 8:30, an estimate honestly arrived at, as I told you, but rendered unreliable by the cold room, a fact Ashworth himself, as a physician, would very likely have recognized the moment he had leisure to reconsider it. A man who begins to doubt his own testimony in a murder case is a dangerous man to a murderer who has built an alibi upon that testimony standing unquestioned. You think Ashworth realized his error and said so to someone and was silenced for it. I think it entirely possible he mentioned his doubt to the one person in that club most anxious that no one should ever revisit the timing of Sir Aubrey's death. Whether he did so knowingly, sensing danger, or entirely innocently in the course of ordinary conversation, I cannot yet say. But Watson, consider this. If Ashworth were murdered to silence a growing doubt about the time of death, then whoever killed him did so with remarkable speed and remarkable nerve within a day of the first killing, which tells us our murderer is neither hesitant nor amateur, whatever gentle impression he may present to a clerk's desk and a ledger of quarterly accounts. We found Wimpole Street already attended by a constable and, within, by Lestrade himself, looking considerably greyer than when we had left him the previous afternoon. 2 deaths in as many days, Mr. Holmes, and both of them connected to that infernal club. I don't like it, and I'll say so plainly. I don't like it above half. Nor should you, said Holmes, crouching by the foot of the narrow staircase where the body had lain before its removal, examining the treads with his lens. Tell me, Lestrade, was there a mark upon the newel post here, or upon the wall, that might suggest a hand thrown out to catch a fall and missing its grip? None that I could find, though I confess I was not looking closely for want of expecting anything but an accident. Then look now, said Holmes, and pointed with the tip of his stick to a place on the polished banister, some 3 feet above the lowest tread, where a thin scuff mark broke the wood's dark varnish, fresh, by the paleness of the exposed grain beneath. A man falling naturally reaches for the rail nearest his hand as he goes, and generally reaches high, near where his hand already rests in descending. This mark sits low and at an angle that suggests a hand dragged downward against the rail, rather than thrown up to catch it, as a man's hand might be dragged, Lestrade, if he were pushed from behind and above, and clutched at the rail only as an afterthought of falling, not as an act of saving himself. Lestrade bent to examine the mark himself, and I saw the colour drain a little further from his face. You're telling me this is murder too? I am telling you, said Holmes, rising and dusting his knees with the same brisk thoroughness he had shown in the billiard room 2 days before, that someone in the Coriolanus Club has now killed twice within 24 hours to protect a single fact from ever being properly examined, the true hour of Sir Aubrey Fenwick Hale's death, and that a murderer capable of such speed and such nerve will not hesitate to kill a 3rd time, should a 3rd person come near enough to the truth to trouble him. Chapter 10. The Passage Behind the Panelling. That evening, with Pemberton's reluctant permission, and Griggs stationed once more at the door, though this time by Holmes's own instruction, and armed with rather more purpose than mere soda water, we returned to the billiard room to test the theory of the hidden passage. Holmes worked the length of the panelling methodically, this time not merely tapping but pressing, testing each moulding and each carved rosette with his fingertips, moving with the patient thoroughness of a man who has all night and does not intend to leave before he has used it. It was Watson, myself, I recalled with no small satisfaction, who found the mechanism, quite by accident, leaning against the panel to rest my leg, which troubles me still in damp weather from an old service wound. My weight fell upon a carved acanthus leaf some 3 feet from the floor, and I heard, rather than saw, a soft click within the wall. Watson, Holmes's voice held an admiration I confess I still treasure in memory. You have done in a moment of fatigue what I could not manage in 20 years of careful design. Stand aside. A section of panelling, perhaps 2 feet wide, swung inward on a hinge so old and so well oiled recently, Holmes noted at once, running a finger along the hinge and holding it to the lamp to show me the fresh sheen upon it, that it made scarcely a sound beyond that single revealing click. Behind it lay a narrow service passage, thick with the dust of years except along a single well-trodden path down its centre, where the dust had been disturbed repeatedly and recently. A servant's passage, Holmes murmured, stepping within and holding his lamp high, built, I should think, to allow the tending of that fireplace without a housemaid's face troubling the gentry at their leisure, a common enough arrangement in a house of this age. before it ever became a club. It runs, if I am not mistaken, the length of the ground floor, connecting eventually with the service stair near the kitchens. We followed it a little way, our lamp throwing long, uncertain shadows across walls that had not felt honest daylight in decades. And there, some 10 feet along, wedged into a gap where two old timbers met, Holmes's sharp eye found what he had, I think, half expected to find from the first moment he had proposed the passage's existence. A thin blade, no longer than a paper knife, its edge still dark with old stain, wrapped in a scrap of oilcloth that had kept the London damp from ruining it entirely. "The murder weapon," I breathed. "The murder weapon," Holmes agreed, lifting it with great care by the very tip of the oilcloth. "Left here, I should think, not through carelessness but through a very particular kind of confidence. The confidence of a man who believed this passage forgotten by every living soul but himself, and who saw no reason to carry a bloodied blade back through a public corridor when he might simply leave it here, in the dark, until such time as he judged it safe to reclaim it." He turned the blade over in the lamplight, examining its hilt with his lens, and I saw his expression change, not to triumph, but to something graver, more settled, as a man's face settles when a suspicion long carried finally receives its confirmation. "There is a maker's mark here, very worn, but legible under glass. Sheffield steel, but the pattern, Watson, this is no English hilt. This is the pattern of a knife made for the Indian trade, the sort sold by the thousand to soldiers and civil servants returning from service, as a curiosity or a keepsake. Sir Aubrey Fenwick Hale, I would wager a considerable sum, owned just such a blade himself, brought home from his years upon the bench in the Punjab, and it was murder's particular cruelty, Watson, to see that he died upon a weapon carried home from the very country, and very possibly the very province, where the grievance against him was first planted." Chapter 11. The Path That Led to the Kitchens. We followed the passage to its end, where it opened, behind a second concealed panel scarcely less cunning than the first, into a disused scullery adjoining the kitchens, a room the club had long since stopped using, its shelves bare, its single window painted shut with the grime of years. "Anyone with knowledge of this passage," Holmes said, holding his lamp to examine the scullery's dust-thick floor, "might enter the billiard room from here, commit whatever business brought them, and withdraw the same way, all without once setting foot in the corridor where Griggs kept his watch. It solves our locked room entirely, Watson, save for the one detail that has troubled me from the first hour of this case. The bolt. The bolt, precisely. If our murderer left by this passage, he had no need whatsoever to trouble himself with locking the door from within before he went. And yet the door was found locked, bolted, and the key still in it, on the inside, exactly as Sir Aubrey himself would have left it had he barred himself in for a private hour's practice, wanting no one to disturb him. I turned this over as we retraced our steps, the fresh path in the dust guiding us back toward the billiard room's hidden panel. "Unless," I said slowly, "the murderer did not need to bolt the door at all, because it was already bolted by Sir Aubrey himself before ever his killer entered by the passage." Holmes stopped dead in the narrow space, and for a long moment said nothing, the lamp throwing strange light across a face I had rarely seen so still. "Watson," he said at last, "I have on more than one occasion accused you of lacking imagination, and I withdraw the charge entirely, and with some embarrassment at my own slowness in arriving where you have just now arrived unaided. Of course the door was bolted before the murderer ever came near it, bolted by Sir Aubrey's own habit, exactly as Pemberton told us he bolted it every Tuesday to be private at his practice. The murderer needed no key, no struggle with the lock, no risk of Griggs hearing an unfamiliar hand at the door, because he never touched the door at all. He came and went entirely by this passage, and the locked room that has baffled Scotland Yard these 2 days past is not a puzzle of ingenious escape. It is merely the ordinary, unremarkable habit of a private man, misread by everyone who found his body as evidence of an impossibility that was never impossible in the first place." "Then why," I asked, Does it matter so greatly who knew of this passage? Half the household staff, surely, in a house of this age, because a housemaid who dusts a forgotten scullery does not thereby know how to oil a hinge silently, nor does she carry an Indian trade knife wrapped in oilcloth, nor does she have a 30-year grievance against the man on the other side of that panel. Holmes's voice had dropped to something quiet and hard. The tone he reserved for the moment a case's shape finally showed itself whole. We are looking, Watson, for someone who had cause to study this house's old plans closely enough to know a secret his fellow members did not, and I begin to think I know precisely where such a man might have found them. Chapter 12. The Architect's Apprentice. It was Mycroft's promised file, delivered to Baker Street that same evening by a silent government messenger, that supplied the thread Holmes had been waiting for. He read it through twice by the fire, and then a third time aloud to me, his voice growing steadily quieter as the account unfolded. The trial of Amin Qureshi, records clerk, aged then but 24, his transportation upon Magistrate Fenwick Hale's ruling, the death of his father within the year, from what the file dryly termed a decline of spirits, and a final notation, added in a later different hand, that the transported man's young son, one Rafiq Qureshi, had subsequently been raised by an uncle in Lahore and had, at the age of 16, been apprenticed, by the charity, ironically enough, of a retired English civil engineer who had known the family before its disgrace, to a firm of architects and builders, where he had shown, the file noted almost as an afterthought, considerable aptitude for draftsmanship. An architect's apprentice, Holmes said softly, setting the file upon his knee, with a father transported and a grandfather dead of shame, raised in a trade that teaches a man to read the bones of a building, its passages, its old service ways, the forgotten architecture beneath its modern face. Watson, do you begin to see the shape of 30 years? You believe that Rafiq Qureshi came to England, that he is Theodore Quill. I believe it is now considerably more than a coincidence that a man skilled in the very trade that would teach him to recognize a papered-over service passage from its telltale signs, an old cornice line, a door's width that does not match the room it serves, a chimney breast too wide for the fireplace it contains, should present himself under an anglicised name for a position that placed him daily within the one club in London where his family's ruin sat drinking sherry and playing billiards, entirely ignorant of who watched him from behind a desk of correspondence. Holmes rose and paced before the fire, his shadow thrown long against the wall. It explains, too, the letter from India that so troubled Sir Aubrey in his final week, not a threat from some old pensioner, as he dismissed it, but very possibly a genuine letter from some remaining connection of the family that arrived by chance and gave our patient Mr. Quill his final spur, or his final proof that the old wound had not healed with the passing of 30 years. But Holmes, if Quill has waited 30 years for his revenge, why act now, and act with such haste and such violence as to kill a second man within a day of the first? That, said Holmes, is the one piece of the puzzle I cannot yet supply, and I confess it troubles me more than any locked door has troubled me in this whole affair. A man patient enough to wait 30 years, to learn a trade, to cross half the world, to secure a position under a false name and hold it 4 years without once betraying himself by so much as a tremor of the hand. Such a man does not, in my experience, suddenly become reckless. Unless, Watson, he believed himself already discovered, or about to be, and struck in haste to prevent a truth from surfacing before he was ready for it to surface. Chapter 13. Mr. Carraway's Headache. It was, oddly enough, young Mr. Carraway, the club member who had twice paced the corridor on the night of the murder, complaining of a headache, who supplied the piece Holmes had been missing, though he did not know he supplied it, and would very likely have been horrified to learn how much his idle gossip had cost another man. We found him at his club the following afternoon, a pleasant, rather vacant young gentleman of perhaps 28, delighted to be consulted by the famous Sherlock Holmes on any matter whatsoever, and entirely without the discretion to wonder why his answers mattered so much. Oh, I remember that evening well enough, Mr. Holmes, on account of my head, a dreadful thing, came on suddenly after dinner, and I walked the corridor twice trying to clear it, since the smoking room was too close with cigar smoke to be borne. Saw Colonel Vane both times, snarling away to himself about his debt. Saw the clerk too, once, Quill was it, coming from the direction of the billiard room, which struck me as odd even then, though I thought no more of it at the time, since I supposed he'd been asked to fetch something for Sir Aubrey. Holmes went very still. At what hour was this, Mr. Carroway, as near as you can recall? Oh, 8:30, or a very little after. I recall because I'd just heard the hall clock strike the half hour and thought, there's another quarter hour of this wretched pain before dinner conversation resumes, and I must pretend interest in Trentham's account of his gout. Did Mr. Quill appear disturbed, hurried? Carroway considered this with the slow, genuine effort of a man unused to being asked to observe anything closely. Now you mention it. Yes, rather. Walking fast, and I recall he had his hand pressed to his coat. Here, he indicated his own ribs, as though he'd taken a stitch from walking too quick, though it struck me at the time as more like a man holding something in place beneath his coat than a man nursing a pain. I thought nothing of it, Mr. Holmes. One doesn't, does one, until someone like yourself comes asking. You did not mention this to the police. They didn't ask about Quill, Mr. Holmes, asked about the Colonel, and about myself, since I'd been in the corridor twice. Gave me rather an unpleasant quarter hour. That did, until Trentham and the others confirmed I'd been with them the rest of the evening. Nobody thought to ask after the clerk. Why should they? He's hardly the sort of man one notices at all. Holmes thanked him with a courtesy that gave no hint of the significance of what he had just heard, and it was not until we were well clear of the club and walking briskly through a fine, cold drizzle that he permitted himself to speak. There, Watson, there is our final proof, offered up by a young man too vacant to know its value. Quill, in the corridor, at 8:30, the very hour we now believe Sir Aubrey died, walking fast, one hand pressed beneath his coat, as a man presses a hand against a wound he has just delivered, or a weapon he has just concealed. Watson, by a witness too self-absorbed to think it worth mentioning to Scotland Yard, and I begin to suspect that Quill does not know he was seen at all, which gives us, for the first time in this whole affair, an advantage he does not know we hold. Then why did he kill Ashworth, if no one had connected him to the murder? Because Ashworth, I now believe, did not doubt the time of death for any medical reason at all, Watson. I think Ashworth saw something in that corridor himself, that same evening, when he passed through at 9:15 to fetch his bag, saw Quill, perhaps, in a state of some disorder, or noticed something amiss about the billiard-room door before it was ever broken open, and mentioned it, in all innocence, to the one man in that club he had no reason whatsoever to suspect. A quiet word to a trusted clerk over the business of settling accounts or arranging Sir Aubrey's affairs, and Quill, hearing it, understood at once that his 30 years of patience stood within a hair's breadth of ruin. Chapter 14. The trap is laid. That evening, Holmes sat long at his desk, composing a letter which he would not permit me to read until it was finished and sealed, and which he addressed, to my considerable astonishment, to Mr. Theodore Quill at the Coriolanus Club. Holmes, you cannot mean to warn him. I mean to do precisely the opposite, Watson, though I grant the distinction may not be immediately apparent. He held the sealed envelope a moment before setting it aside for the morning post. I have written to inform Mr. Quill that a private investigator, engaged by certain concerned members of the club, has uncovered evidence of an old service passage connecting the billiard room to the disused scullery, and that this evidence will be laid before Inspector Lestrade tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock precisely in the billiard room itself, where the passage will be formally examined in the presence of the club's president and such members as care to attend. But that is nearly the truth entirely. Why disguise it as a private investigator's discovery rather than your own? Because a man who believes Sherlock Holmes already suspects him will run, Watson, or grow so cautious as to be unreachable. But a man who believes a nameless private investigator has stumbled upon his secret by chance mere bad luck, rather than brilliant deduction, is a man who may yet believe the danger can be managed, removed even, if he acts with sufficient speed and sufficient nerve, both of which we have already seen he possesses in ample measure. I felt a chill at his meaning. You intend to use yourself as bait. I intend to be in that scullery passage a full hour before the appointed time, Watson, with Lestrade and 2 good constables stationed where they will do the most good, and I intend that Mr. Quill, believing the passage undiscovered until tomorrow evening, and believing his one hope of safety lies in destroying the evidence, the passage's very existence perhaps by some means, or any trace remaining within it, will come tonight, under cover of darkness, to see for himself what danger he faces, and to remove whatever he can before Lestrade's men arrive. And if he does not come, if he is more patient than you credit him, Holmes's face, in the firelight, held an expression I had seen only rarely. Not doubt, precisely, but the particular gravity of a man staking a great deal upon his reading of another man's character. Then we have lost nothing but a night's sleep, Watson, and we begin again tomorrow with Lestrade's official search of the passage, which will find the blade regardless, and give us grounds enough to question Quill formally in any case. But I do not think he will fail to come. A man who has waited 30 years for his revenge, and achieved it, and now sees that revenge threatened with exposure on the very eve of his triumph. Such a man does not sit calmly at his ledgers waiting for the sky to fall. He acts. It is the one thing his whole history tells us of him with certainty. Chapter 15. A Watch in the Dark. We took up our positions a little after 10 that night, Holmes and I in the disused scullery itself, concealed behind a great dust-sheeted dresser that had once held the club's finer china. Lestrade and his constables stationed nearer the billiard room's hidden panel, all of us in darkness, all of us silent, the only sound the faint creak of the old house settling around us and, somewhere distant, the muffled tread of Griggs upon his ordinary rounds, ignorant of the drama unfolding so near his post. I confess the waiting told upon my nerves more than any battle I recall from my Afghan service, for a soldier at least knows roughly the hour his enemy will come. We knew only that he might come at all, and the not knowing stretched every small sound of the old house into a possible footstep, every settling timber into a possible hand upon a panel. It was a little past midnight when Holmes's hand closed suddenly upon my arm. I heard it then myself, the faintest scrape of a hinge, oiled but not silent, to an ear straining as hard as mine now strained, coming from the direction of the billiard-room panel some 30 feet distant down the black passage. A thin line of lamplight showed briefly as the panel opened, then narrowed again, as whoever had entered drew it nearly closed behind them, leaving only a sliver of light by which to work. A figure moved down the passage toward us, slight, quick, entirely without the hesitation of a man unfamiliar with his surroundings, moving, indeed, with the sure step of someone who had walked this exact path so many times in memory, if not in fact, that darkness held no terror for him at all. He passed within 6 feet of where we crouched and knelt at the gap in the old timbers where the blade had lain, running his hand along the wood with growing urgency when his fingers found nothing there. "Looking for something, Mr. Quill?" Holmes's voice, quiet and perfectly level, fell into that darkness like a stone into still water. I saw the figure freeze absolutely still, not the startled jerk of an innocent man surprised, but the sudden, total stillness of a man whose whole life has trained him to master exactly such moments. A lamp flared, Lestrade's, from the billiard-room end of the passage, throwing sudden hard light down its length and catching Theodore Quill exactly where he knelt, one hand still pressed flat against the old timber, his face turned toward us with an expression that held, in that first unguarded instant, not fear at all, but something far closer to a terrible, weary relief. The look, I have since thought, of a man laying down a burden carried so long that its sudden absence is almost its own kind of grief. "You have found it, then," he said, and his voice, when it came, was quite steady, quite calm, with only the faintest trace remaining of whatever accent 30 years of careful English speech had worn away. I had wondered how long it would take. I confess I had hoped for longer, Mr. Holmes, though I cannot say I am surprised it was you who found me first. Chapter 16. What 30 years had taught him. Lestrade's constables closed in on him, but Holmes raised a hand, and to my astonishment, the inspector held them back a moment. "Let him speak if he will," Holmes said quietly. "There is a great deal here that Scotland Yard's charge sheet will never trouble itself to record, and I think Dr. Watson and I would both count it a poor return on 30 years of another man's suffering to hear none of it before the law takes its ordinary course." Quill, I shall continue to call him so, though I understood now the name was a coat worn over another man's life entirely, rose slowly from where he knelt, and in the lamplight I saw for the first time how tired he looked, how the stillness I had taken for a clerk's practised discretion was, in truth, the exhaustion of a man who had held himself rigid for so long that he scarcely remembered how to do otherwise. "My name," he said, "was Rafiq Qureshi, before ever it was Theodore Quill. My father was Amin Qureshi, a records clerk of the district court at Lahore, and an honest man, Mr. Holmes. I have spent 30 years proving that to myself, when the world would not trouble to prove it for me." He falsified nothing that was not already a lie in the first place. A revenue assessment doubled by a corrupt collector against a village that could not pay it, and could not survive the seizure that would follow if it did not. My father altered the figures to what they ought honestly to have been. He did it knowing the risk. He did it because the alternative was to watch children starve through a winter for the sake of a clerk's arithmetic he knew to be false. The Soldiers' Tribunal understood this, Holmes said. It was not a question. The Soldiers' Tribunal understood it perfectly, Mr. Holmes, and would have dealt with him leniently. A reprimand, perhaps a transfer, nothing more, for even soldiers knew corruption when they saw it plainly enough stated. But Magistrate Fenwick Hale overruled them. He wanted, I have come to believe, over 30 years of turning the matter over, to make an example, to show the district that the letter of English law bent for no one, however sympathetic the circumstance, however corrupt the figure it protected. My father was transported. My grandfather died within the year, of shame he had done nothing to earn. My mother, his voice caught, very slightly, the first true break in that long composure. My mother took in sewing to keep us from the workhouse, and died herself before I was 12, worn through by work no gently raised woman should ever have been made to do. And you were raised by an uncle, Holmes said, and apprenticed to an architect's firm, where you learned a trade that would in time bring you to England, and to this club, and to this passage. Quill looked at him with something that was almost admiration, almost the ghost of the courteous clerk he had spent 4 years so carefully performing. "You have read the file, then you know it all, or very nearly. I came to England 8 years ago, Mr. Holmes, under a name easier for English tongues and English references to swallow, and I spent 4 of those years simply watching him, Fenwick Hale, learning his habits, his club, his Tuesday evenings alone at billiards, before ever I sought a position anywhere near him. It was luck, I confess, that the Coriolanus needed a clerk the same season I presented myself with Mr. Calloway's kind and entirely genuine recommendation, earned by 4 years of honest service in a position that had nothing whatsoever to do with my true purpose. I did not plan the passage from the first, Mr. Holmes. I found it as you found it, by patience, by attention to a house's old bones, by a builder's trained eye for a cornice line that did not match, a chimney breast too broad for its grate. Once I had found it, the rest was only a matter of waiting for the courage, or the recklessness, to use it. "The letter from India," Holmes said, "that was genuine, and no doing of mine at all, which I confess struck me at the time as something very near to Providence, though I do not generally credit such things. A cousin, still in Lahore, wrote to say that our old family's case had been raised again in some minor local agitation over land reform, our name mentioned as an old injustice worth remembering. He meant it, I think, only as news, some small comfort that we were not entirely forgotten. He could not have known it would reach Fenwick Hale's own desk by the ordinary chance of my sorting his correspondence, nor that I would recognise the hand and the postmark and understand, in that instant, that 30 years of patience had brought me at last to the very edge of my resolve. "You killed him that same week." "I killed him the following Tuesday, Mr. Holmes, when I knew he would be alone at his billiards with the door bolted, as was his unbreakable habit. I came by the passage. I do not think he even properly understood, in the moment, who I was, or why. I said my father's name to him, once, and I do not believe it meant anything to him at all, which was, I think, the cruelest thing I learned in that whole terrible minute. 30 years of ruin, and to the man who caused it, we had never been anything but a name in a file he had long since forgotten. The silence that followed this held a weight I have rarely felt in any room, even one that had lately held a corpse. Chapter 17. The Doctor's Fatal Kindness. "And Ashworth?" Holmes asked, after a long moment. "You need not answer, Mr. Quill, if you have said all you wish to say, but I confess I would like to understand it, if you will grant me that." Quill's composure, which had held through the account of his father and mother with a terrible practiced steadiness, wavered now for the first time. "Ashworth I did not plan," he said, low. "Ashworth came to me himself, Mr. Holmes, 2 days after, the day before you first called at the club, I believe. He came to my office in some agitation and told me, in confidence, as a man tells his clerk something he has not yet worked out how to say to the police, that he had begun to doubt his own estimate of the time of death. He said the cold grate troubled him. He said he had been turning it over and thought he ought to go to Lestrade and revise his statement, and he asked me, of all people, whether I thought it would look badly upon him, professionally, to admit an error in a matter so serious. "He trusted you," I said, before I could stop myself. "He trusted me, Doctor, because I had given him 4 years of reason to trust me, and because it had never once occurred to him, why should it, that the quiet clerk who managed Sir Aubrey's letters might have any interest whatsoever in when, precisely, Sir Aubrey had died." Quill's hands, I saw, had begun very faintly to tremble, the first true sign of feeling he had shown since Lestrade's lamp found him in the dark. I told him I thought his instinct was sound, and that he ought certainly to speak to the police, and that I would walk with him to Wimpole Street that evening to help him compose his thoughts, since I understood he found the prospect distressing. He was glad of the company, Mr. Holmes. He thanked me for it, on his own stairs, not 2 minutes before I put my hand against his back and pushed him down them. He stopped. For a long moment none of us spoke, and I heard, distantly, the ordinary sounds of the sleeping club above us, a floorboard, a clock, the small unconcerned noises of a house that did not yet know what had passed in its cellar passage that night. "He was a kind man," Quill said finally, very quietly. "Kinder than Fenwick Hale ever was to a single soul in his whole career upon the bench. I have thought of little else these 2 days past, Mr. Holmes, and I will tell you honestly that I do not know how to reconcile what I did to him with anything I believed about myself when I began this. I told myself for 30 years that I sought justice, not slaughter. I am no longer entirely certain I know the difference any more, or that I ever did." "That," said Holmes, and his voice, though still level, held something I had rarely heard in it before. Not condemnation exactly, but a kind of grave, exhausted sorrow, "is very often the way of it, Mr. Quill. Revenge dressed itself before you as justice for 30 years, because justice was the only name you could bear to give it, and still sleep at night. But justice does not require an innocent doctor's death to protect itself from discovery. Only revenge requires that, because revenge, unlike justice, cannot survive being seen clearly for what it is." Lestrade stepped forward then, and his voice, when it came, was gentler than I had ever heard it. "Theodore Quill, or Rafik Qureshi, if that is the name you'd sooner answer to now at the last, I am arresting you for the wilful murders of Sir Aubrey Fenwick Hale and Dr. Edmund Ashworth. You are not obliged to say anything further, but anything you do say—" "I know the caution, Inspector," Quill said, with something that was almost, terribly, a smile. "I have sat in enough English courtrooms in my imagination, these 30 years past, to know it by heart. You need no trouble to finish it." He went with them quietly, without struggle, and I confess that of all the murderers I had watched Holmes unmask across our long association, none left me with quite the ache that Theodore Quill's quiet, dignified surrender left me that night, in the cold dark of a servant's passage, built for a purpose its long-dead architect could never have imagined it would one day serve. Chapter 18. What Remained. The days that followed brought their share of ordinary aftermath. Statements taken, the passage formally surveyed and photographed for the club's mortified records, Pemberton's anxious inquiries as to whether the whole business might yet be kept from the newspapers, which Holmes answered with a courtesy that did not trouble to disguise his contempt for the question. Colonel Vane, cleared entirely, sent Holmes a case of excellent port by way of thanks, together with a note admitting, with the bluff honesty I had come to rather like in him, that he had feared himself hanged before the truth came out, and had spent 3 sleepless nights composing in his head the speech he meant to make from the dock. Young Carraway, we learned, dined out for a fortnight on his part in the affair, having somehow transformed his idle headache and idler gossip into a tale of shrewd observation that grew more heroic with each retelling. A vanity Holmes bore with better humour than I should have managed in his place. It was the trial itself, some weeks later, that troubled me most, for the jury, moved, I think, by the account of Amin Qureshi's ruin that the defence laid carefully before them, and by Quill's own quiet, unflinching testimony, which offered no excuse for Ashworth's death and sought none, returned a verdict of guilty upon both counts, but recommended mercy in terms strong enough that the judge, himself visibly affected, commuted the sentence upon Sir Aubrey's killing from the gallows to transportation for life, though no such mercy could be found, nor perhaps should have been found, for the death of a kind man pushed down his own stairs for the crime of trusting a colleague too well. I visited Holmes at Baker Street the evening the sentence was confirmed, and found him at the window, watching the lamplighters make their rounds against an early autumn dusk, the small fragment of amber billiard chalk, I do not know why he had kept it, turning once more between his fingers. "You are troubled," I said. "I am reflecting, Watson, which is not quite the same condition, though I grant the two often wear each other's clothes." He set the chalk down at last upon the mantel, beside the Persian slipper and its wretched tobacco, and turned to face me fully. "I have solved a great many puzzles in this room, and I confess I do not always trouble myself afterward with what became of the men and women I unmasked. It is, I think, a necessary discipline in this work. A detective who grieved equally for every criminal he brought to justice would not long remain of any use to justice at all. But this one, Watson—" He did not finish the sentence, and I did not press him to. Chapter 19. The Outro. "The trouble with revenge," Holmes said at last, settling into his chair and reaching at length for his pipe, "is that it borrows justice's clothing so convincingly that even the man who wears it can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins." Fenwick Hale was, by every account we gathered, a genuinely cruel administrator of a law that did not require his cruelty to function, a man who mistook severity for principle, and inflicted upon a village's honest clerk a ruin the law itself never demanded. There was real injustice at the root of this case, Watson, and I will not pretend otherwise merely because its final flowering was murder. And yet you gave Lestrade the evidence that hangs him, or transports him rather, since the jury's mercy softened even that. I did, and I would do so again tomorrow, for the alternative is a world in which any man may appoint himself judge and executioner over an old wrong, however genuine, and I have seen too much of where that road leads to walk it myself, however much sympathy I hold for the traveller. He drew at last upon his pipe, and the familiar blue smoke curled toward the ceiling in the old, comfortable way that told me the case, in his own mind, was now properly closed, whatever ache it had left behind it. Justice and revenge look identical from a certain angle, Watson. Both demand that a wrong be answered. Both draw their strength from a genuine grievance. But justice submits itself to a judgment beyond the aggrieved man's own certainty. Revenge trusts only itself, and that is why revenge, in the end, always finds Ashworth to push down some staircase, some innocent, incidental obstacle it did not plan for, and cannot, having gone that far already, permit to survive. I said nothing for a while, content merely to sit in the familiar warmth of our fire, and let the evening settle around us, as it had settled around 1,000 such evenings before. "There is one thing that puzzles me still," I said eventually. "The billiard chalk. You found it in Pemberton's pocket the very first morning, before ever we had gone to the club. What did it tell you, in the end?" Holmes smiled, a real smile, the first I had seen from him in some days, and it did more to lighten the room than the fire itself. "Very little of any use, Watson, if I am entirely honest with you, which I generally try to be in this room if nowhere else. I told you at the time it was offered for practice, not for pride, and I meant it rather more literally than you perhaps credited. A detective's mind, like any other instrument, grows blunt with disuse between cases, and I find a small, inconsequential deduction each morning keeps the edge sharp for the larger ones that follow. Pemberton's chalk taught me nothing whatsoever about Sir Aubrey Fenwick Hale's death. It taught me only that I was, on that particular morning, still capable of seeing clearly, and that, Watson, on a case that would in the end turn upon a doctor's honest doubt, a clerk's practiced stillness, and a corridor's telling silence at 20 minutes to 9, was rather a comforting thing to know before I ever set foot outside this room. He knocked out his pipe against the grate, and outside, the lamplighters had finished their rounds, and all along Baker Street the gas burned steady against the coming dark, indifferent, as London always is, to the small and terrible dramas that unfold nightly behind its 1,000 ordinary, unremarkable doors.